So picture this. You're watching a horror movie franchise, you're having a great time watching movies of differing quality, and then you click play on the next sequel. And suddenly you find that this movie is set in the future, and your favorite horror icon is suddenly in space. Now, depending on how big of a horror fan you are, you might have already come across this phenomenon or have at least heard of it. If you haven't, the horror space sequel is a movie in a horror franchise that has previously never taken place in outer space, suddenly having a movie in space. The most well-known example of a horror space sequel is probably Jason X, the 10th Friday the 13th movie, but there are some other pretty well-known franchises like Hellraiser and Leprechaun that also have a space sequel. I wanted to find out why. Now, sci-fi as a genre has existed and been popular for a long time, but in the late 70s, when Star Wars came out, the genre absolutely exploded in popularity. Audiences wanted more sci-fi, and studios wanted to cash in on the success of Star Wars. The first example of a space sequel that I was able to find was actually the 1979 James Bond film Moonraker, which partially takes place in a space shuttle. Now, originally, the next James Bond film that was planned was supposed to be a different movie based on a different novel, but after the success of Star Wars, they seem to have changed something and released Moonraker instead. In the horror world, sci-fi also proved to be a big hit with Ridley Scott's 1979 movie Alien. In fact, it was greenlit because of Star Wars. Without Star Wars, we might have never had Alien, at least not in the way it is known today.
And when Star Wars came out and was the extraordinary hit that it was, then suddenly science fiction became the hot genre.
They wanted to follow through on Star Wars, and they wanted to follow through fast. And the only spaceship script they had sitting on their desk was Alien. So they greenlighted it. Wham!
So, how does this go to space sequels? Well, the first example of a horror movie space sequel I want to mention is Leprechaun 4 in space. So the third one lead more into comedy and the absurd, and it proved to be a pretty successful made-for-video movie. The director had a vague idea of setting the next one in space and to have some alien homages. It kind of started off as a joke, but kind of the more he thought about it, the more he kind of thought that it would work, as again, set something in space, put some alien homages, do stuff like that, and there you go. So the one thing I want to mention is that this movie actually got greenlit because of the chestburster scene in Leprechaun 4. Now, if you haven't seen it, in this movie, instead of bursting out of someone's chest, the leprechaun bursts out of a man's penis. And the conversation where the director of Leprechaun 4 pitched this specific scene is actually how Leprechaun 4 was greenlit. So basically, we kind of directly have Alien to thank for the Leprechaun space sequel. Now, the actual first example of a horror movie space sequel was Critters 4, released in 1992. So if you don't know about the Critters franchise, it revolves around the so-called Krites, which are Krites or Crits, I'm not sure actually. Sometimes they're also referred to just as the Critters, but I think officially in the actual franchise they're Krites or Crits. I'm not sure how to pronounce that correctly, I'm so sorry. Anyway, they are alien creatures that will eat anything in sight, including humans and, any human property and stuff. So, being aliens, I think setting a sequel in space kind of makes sense. I will admit, I myself have only seen the first Critters film a little while ago at this point, but from what I remember, I think there were already a couple of scenes that were a little bit in space. Most of the film was on Earth, but I think there were a little bit, or a few scenes. So, I don't know, I feel like calling this one of those space sequels and wondering, oh, why did they set this in space, kind of doesn't make sense to me. I feel like I get why they would make Critters 4 be set in, outer space, considering that's where the literal aliens come from. The next example I want to mention is Hellraiser Bloodlines, which is also the 4th movie in the Hellraiser franchise. I'm not sure why so many of these are specifically 4th entries in the franchises. But, okay, so Hellraiser Bloodlines, a part of it is set on a spaceship in the future, but I myself wouldn't call this movie quite a quote-unquote space sequel, because Hellraiser Bloodlines shows the Cenobites throughout different time periods, from 18th century France to modern day, which was the 90s, and the future. And Clive Barker, who is the writer of the original story that Hellraiser is even based on, was an executive producer on Bloodlines, and stated that he wanted to do something new and fresh. As a result, the film follows the Le Marchand. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that. I have seen this movie. I'm just terrible with pronouncing names. As a result, the film follows the Le Marchand family throughout 3 different timelines. However, Hellraiser Bloodlines had a lot of problems during its making, so the film that we actually ended up getting wasn't quite what the intended movie was, because apparently the studio wanted to have Pinhead earlier and just change some stuff, and apparently the director straight up refused and even wanted his name off the project, and there was someone else doing the reshoots, and just apparently there was a lot of difficulties in even getting Hellraiser Bloodlines made. But I think it would have been interesting to see the movie made as it was intended. Now, as I previously mentioned, the probably most well-known example of a space sequel is Jason X, the 10th film in the Friday the 13th franchise. Now, if you've seen the previous film, Jason Goes to Hell, you'll know that the ending teases a Freddy and Jason crossover film, with Freddy's glove dragging Jason's hockey mask underneath the earth into hell. Here's the thing though, Jason Goes to Hell came out in 1993, and we wouldn't get Freddy vs. Jason until 2003. The Freddy vs. Jason idea was stuck in production hell for quite a long time, with no luck of having a script that successfully brought the 2 franchises together. In the meantime, Sean S. Cunningham, director of the first Friday film and producer of many of the other films, wanted to make another one in the franchise. His production company wasn't doing that well and they needed money, so, they figured, fuck it, let's make a 10th movie. When it came to thinking about what the 10th movie would be about, they wanted to bring the franchise into a new direction and give the fans something that hasn't been done in the Friday the 13th franchise so far. And they entertained the idea of basically everything, eventually landing on the idea of putting Jason in space. Now, Jason X itself didn't perform well at cinemas, however, it did also struggle with not being released for 2 years despite being done, and also the movie was leaked before release, becoming one of the most pirated movies that year. Now, the most recent movie in the horror space sequels is currently Amityville in Space. There are actually a lot of Amityville films out there with very ridiculous plots and titles, such as Amityville in the Hood, Amityville Vampire, and my favorite one, just based off the title, Amityville Vibrator. I'm sorry, when I first saw that, I thought it was the funniest thing ever. I had to look it up to make sure it was actually real, and it is. It looks so low budget. Anyway, so the actual rights of to the general story of the Amityville crime and hauntings can't be owned by anyone, since Amityville is a real town. The events that happened are real, they're historical events, and you can't really just a studio can't really copyright it and be the sole person making the film, the sole thing that makes the film. which means anyone can make a movie and use the Amityville title. And because of this, I think it was basically inevitable for someone to make an Amityville in space movie, considering the space sequel phenomenon and how quite well known it is. So yeah, that's pretty much all the movies I wanted to sort of look at and talk about. I guess I hope you learned something about these silly little movies, and thank you for watching.